silence doesn't just happen, it is earned. In the glass-walled fortress of Hale Capital, silence didn't exist until Joseph Franklin walked in. It wasn't the silence of respect at first. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a predator watching a wounded animal enter his den. Marcus Hale, a man who measured his life in skyscrapers and hostile takeovers, looked at the man standing in his doorway and saw a punchline in a frayed jacket. He saw a nuisance. He saw a ghost from a neighborhood he had already decided to erase from the map. He didn't know that the man standing before him was the only person in the world who could make his entire empire tremble with a single 10-digit number. He didn't know that for the last 9 days, this nuisance had been begging him for the chance to be a human being, a chance Marcus was about to laugh away with a cruelty that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Before the first word was spoken, the power in that room had already shifted, though only one of them knew it. For 9 days, Joseph Franklin had been a ghost haunting the corridors of power. That is the part of this story that dictates everything that followed, the part that Marcus Hale, in his custom-tailored arrogance, couldn't bother to see. 3 weeks prior, Joseph had sat in the quiet of the public library on Larimer Street, the scent of old paper and floor wax around him, and typed a letter. It wasn't a demand or a threat. It was a 2-page, meticulously crafted appeal for a conversation outlining the lives of 14 families who were about to be crushed by the gears of a demolition permit. The letter was received, logged, and promptly shredded by a junior assistant who didn't like the look of the return address. Joseph then called the development office 4 times. Each time, he was met with the rehearsed politeness of a gatekeeper promising a follow-up that would never come. He spent 4 hours in the hard plastic chairs of the city council gallery, watching as the agenda item regarding his building was tabled in a whisper between men who had already been bought and paid for by Hale's legal team. Joseph didn't seek this confrontation out of a desire for drama. He sought it because he was a man who believed in the decent way. He had once walked these same polished marble floors as an insider. 22 years ago, Joseph Franklin wore the suits, held the titles, and ran a community development organization that actually cared. He had a home on Clement Avenue and a wife named Ruth, whose laugh could fill a house better than any furniture ever could. They had a son, David, a bright boy of 16, until a Tuesday afternoon changed the physics of their world. A drunk driver turned their lives into a wreckage of surgeries and rehabilitation. For years, Joseph fought a different kind of war, an insurance warfare designed to exhaust the grieving. It stripped away the savings, the house, and eventually it claimed Ruth. Her heart simply gave out under the weight of a grief that had no end. Joseph didn't fall into the streets out of defeat. He walked into them because after losing everything, he realized that the only thing that mattered was being the person who stands next to those who have no one else. He lived among the 14 families on Larimer Street not as a martyr, but as the connective tissue of a community the city had forgotten. He knew Gloria, who was 4 months away from a housing eligibility that would change her life after 3 years of hard-won sobriety. He knew Terence, a young father working split shifts until his hands shook, just to keep his 2 daughters on a mattress that was dry and safe. He knew Edmund and Celeste, a Haitian couple in their 70s, who just needed 6 weeks for their son to arrange their passage to Miami. To Marcus Hale, these were unrecognized occupants on a legal ledger. To Joseph, they were the reason he woke up in the morning. When the legal aid office told him the demolition permit was clean and the timeline was legal, Joseph realized that the law was a wall, and Marcus Hale was the man holding the bricks. He had one card left to play, a card he had kept face down for over 20 years out of a sense of personal honor. On that final Thursday morning, Joseph told the families he would go to the 34th floor. He told them he would look Marcus Hale in the eye and give him the chance to be a man instead of a brand. He had spoken to an old friend the night before, a voice from his past who had risen to heights Marcus Hale could only dream of. The friend had told him, "Try it your way, Joe. But if he won't hear you, put me on." When the elevator doors opened at Hale Capital, the receptionist's eyes darted from Joseph's torn sleeve to his worn canvas bag. She saw a vagrant, but when she saw the modern smartphone in his hand, held with the steady grip of a man who feared nothing, she hesitated. Behind the double doors of the boardroom, Marcus Hale heard there was a homeless advocate demanding a meeting. He didn't feel threatened. He felt entertained. He wanted an audience for his own brilliance. "Send him in," Marcus laughed to his colleagues. "I want to see what the bottom of the barrel looks like." Joseph walked into the room, his presence a stark, jagged line against the smooth perfection of the executive suite. Marcus sat back, silver-templed and radiant with the glow of a man who had never lost a fight. His colleagues, a trio of well-groomed mirrors, adjusted their expressions to match Marcus's smug curiosity. Joseph spoke clearly, without the tremor of a victim. He laid out the names, the dates, the sobriety, the 2 jobs, and the son in Miami. He detailed the ignored letters and the silent phone calls. He didn't ask for a miracle. He asked for 60 days of human decency. Marcus listened, but he wasn't hearing a story. He was hearing a series of inefficiencies. When Joseph finished, Marcus leaned forward, his smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Sir," he said, the word dripping with practiced condescension, "the permits are filed, the timeline is set. These people aren't tenants, they're obstacles. And frankly, there is nothing I can do, and there is certainly nothing you can do." The room erupted in the kind of laughter that only exists in places where people believe they are untouchable. It was a rich, full-bodied sound, the sound of a man who believed he had just delivered the final word. Marcus gestured at the floor-to-ceiling windows, at the vast city that he felt he owned. "Call whoever you want," Marcus sneered, his shoulders shaking with the absurdity of the situation. "Call the cops, call the papers, call the man on the moon. It won't change the fact that you're leaving my office and that building is coming down." Joseph didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply reached into his torn jacket, pulled out the phone, and pressed a single button on the screen. It connected instantly. The laughter in the room didn't fade. It was severed. Because the voice that came through the speaker was not the voice of a lawyer or a journalist. It was a voice that Marcus Hale had spent $12,000 just to sit near at a private gala. It was the voice of a man who controlled the very air Marcus breathed in this industry. "Joe," the voice said, resonant and familiar, "I've been waiting. Tell me he was the man I hoped he'd be." Joseph looked Marcus Hale directly in the eyes that were currently widening in a slow-motion realization of total disaster. Joseph spoke into the phone, his voice a calm, steady blade. "It went exactly how we expected, Greg. He's told me to call whoever I want. I think he'd like to speak with you." Joseph extended the phone across the expanse of the mahogany table. His arm was a bridge between 2 worlds. Marcus Hale didn't move. He couldn't. The oxygen in the room seemed to have been sucked out by the weight of that one name, that one voice. The colleagues stared at their hands, their smugness replaced by a cold, prickling terror. Marcus reached out, his hand trembling, for the silence that followed was not the absence of sound, but the presence of a crushing weight. For 4 agonizing minutes, the executive suite of Hale Capital became a vacuum. Marcus Hale, the man who had just been laughing so hard he nearly spilled his vintage scotch, now sat with his hand clamped over his mouth in a gesture of primal shock. His face, usually a mask of bronze tan and expensive skin care, drained of color until he looked like a statue carved from gray ash. Across the table, his colleagues, the predators who had been sharpening their teeth on Joseph's misfortune, became suddenly fascinated by the grain of the mahogany table. They didn't dare breathe. They didn't dare look at Marcus. They knew that the man on the other end of that phone didn't just have the power to stop the demolition, he had the power to erase Marcus Hale from the city's skyline forever. The voice was unmistakable, a baritone that had commanded national stages and dictated the flow of billions. It was a voice that Marcus had worshipped from a distance, never realizing that the man who possessed it owed his very soul to a woman named Ruth, who had once shared her soup with a hungry boy. When Marcus finally lowered the phone, the movement was jerky, like a puppet with tangled strings. He didn't set the device down. He placed it on the table with a reverence usually reserved for religious relics. He didn't look at his colleagues. He didn't look at the city behind him. He looked at Joseph Franklin's torn jacket, and for the first time he actually saw it. He saw the history in the fraying threads. He saw the 9 days of struggle he had ignored. He saw the 4 hours of waiting in the council gallery. "He told me about the letter," Marcus whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "He told me about the phone calls. He told me that you sat in a plastic chair for 4 hours just to be heard." Marcus paused, his eyes glassing over with a terrifying clarity. "And then he told me that if I didn't listen to you, he would make sure that by tomorrow morning my credit lines would be frozen and my permits would be under a federal audit that would last until my hair turned grey. He said you were the finest man he'd ever known. Joseph stood perfectly still, his worn canvas satchel still heavy on his shoulder. He didn't gloat. He didn't lean over the table to savor the smell of Marcus's fear. There was no triumph in his expression, only a profound, weary sadness. "I didn't want to make that call," Joseph said, and the room seemed to shrink around his words. "I spent 9 days trying to give you the opportunity to be the man you pretend to be in your brochures. I wrote the letter because I believed you might have a heart. I went to the council because I believed in the system. I went to legal aid because I believed in the law. I tried every decent door in this city before I tried this one, Mr. Hale, because I wanted to change your mind, not just your plans. I wanted you to see Gloria and Terence and the others as people, not as obstacles to be moved by a bulldozer. If I force your hand, you'll comply, but you'll still be the same man who laughed at a torn jacket, and that is the real tragedy of this room." The humiliation in the room was palpable, thick enough to taste. Marcus's colleagues, sensing the shift in the wind, began to pull away from him physically, their chairs creaking as they distanced themselves from a sinking ship. Marcus himself seemed to be shrinking inside his light blue suit. The architecture of his power, the glass walls, the custom furniture, the $3,000 watch felt suddenly like a cage. "I looked at you, and I saw a punchline," Marcus admitted, the words spilling out of him with a raw, ugly honesty. "I've spent 20 years training myself to look past people like you. I thought that was how you won. I thought that's what this city demanded. I've been doing it so long I didn't even realize I was doing it until the world stopped turning 5 minutes ago." He looked at the phone, then back at Joseph. "I'm sorry, not because I'm afraid of him. I'm sorry because you were right. I'm sorry because I let a man who has nothing teach me what it actually means to have everything." For a long moment, Joseph didn't speak. He let the apology hang in the air, let it settle into the carpet and the walls. He wasn't looking for an apology. He was looking for a solution. 60 days, Joseph said, his voice regaining its quiet authority. 60 days for the families, but not just time, Marcus. They need resources. They need a bridge to where they are going, not just a stay of execution. Gloria needs her Section 8. Edmund and Celeste need their son in Miami. Terence needs a place where his daughters don't have to sleep on a mattress in the corner. You have the means to make that happen without even feeling the cost. That is the price of your lesson today. Marcus nodded, not with the arrogance of a deal-maker, but with the frantic energy of a man trying to find his way out of a dark room. "Anything," Marcus said. "Funding, placement, relocation specialists. I'll handle it personally. I'll show you what it looks like when I'm actually looking." Joseph reached out and picked up his phone. He didn't check the screen. He didn't look at the notification that his friend was still waiting on the line. He tucked it into his pocket and adjusted the strap of his bag. "Don't let the comfort make you forget this feeling, Marcus," Joseph warned. "The world is full of people you think are invisible, but they are the ones holding the world together while you're busy building glass boxes on top of them. I'll be at the building on Larimer Street. I expect your people there by tomorrow morning, and I expect them to know the names of the people they are helping. If they don't, I still have Greg's number." With that, Joseph turned. He didn't wait for a handshake. He didn't wait for the colleagues to offer their feigned respect. He walked out of the boardroom, his footsteps silent on the deep pile carpet, leaving a room full of people who suddenly realized they were far poorer than the man who had just left. The lobby of Hale Capital felt different as Joseph walked through it. The marble was just stone. The glass was just sand. The security guards and the receptionist didn't look like obstacles anymore. They just looked like people. Joseph stepped out onto the sidewalk, and the humidity of the city hit him like a physical embrace. He stood for a second, watching the rush of the midday crowd, the suits, the tourists, the workers, the dreamers. He thought about Ruth, and he thought about the way she used to laugh before the punchline. He felt a phantom warmth on his shoulder, the kind of comfort that doesn't come from a bank account or a title. He had won more than 60 days. He had won a reminder that even in a city of stone, the human heart can still be cracked open if you're willing to knock on enough doors. He began the long walk back to Larimer Street. He didn't take a cab. He didn't call for a ride. He wanted to feel the pavement beneath his feet, the same pavement that Gloria and Terence walked every day. He knew they were waiting for him. He knew they were sitting in that church basement clutching their coffee cups and praying for a miracle they didn't think would come. Joseph smiled to himself, a small, private thing. He wasn't a hero, and he wasn't a savior. He was just a man who knew how to use a phone, and a man who remembered what it was like to lose everything. As he turned the corner onto Larimer, the sight of the old, weathered brick building filled his vision. It was beautiful in its decay, a monument to the people inside it. The story of Joseph Franklin didn't end with a headline or a plaque. It ended with 14 families who got to sleep through the night without the sound of a bulldozer in their dreams. It ended with Marcus Hale sitting in his office long after his colleagues had left, staring at a torn piece of paper with the names of 14 people he had never met, but whose lives were now his responsibility. And it ended with Joseph Franklin sitting on a folding chair in a church basement, eating a bowl of donated soup and telling his neighbors that they were safe. He had people waiting, and for the first time in a long time, the world was exactly the way it was supposed to be. Joseph closed his eyes, listened to the sound of the neighborhood breathing around him, and finally, he let himself rest. "Would you like me to do anything else for you?"